Steve, your question for Mayor Nenshi. Go ahead.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Hi, Steve.
Chatting with you. I just have a question on probably one of the big topics, the Calgary Next development. And just wondering kind of where you stand on that. And if you ever see an opportunity of this actually moving forward in the future. And the other part of that question would be, do you feel that having these professional sports facilities actually enhances our cultural appeal as Calgarians?
Steve, are you a sports fan?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so you're Flames, Hitmen, Stampeders. So you have a vested interest in a new stadium or a new complex, if you will.
Well, I don't know if I have a vested interest per se, but I am interested in what the municipal, the provincial, and federal funding looks like, what the private funding looks like, and if we believe that this would actually be an economic boon for Calgary if we were to have something like this.
Is it true about $440 million would be coming out of taxpayers' pockets?
More,
give or take?
probably.
More than 440?
Yeah, so that's a really, really good question, Steve, with a really, really complicated answer. So here we go. Number one, the very last thing you said is, do these things lead to economic benefit? I hate to tell you, but the answer is probably no. There are bushels and bushels of academic studies that have looked at stadiums and arena projects, and they're pretty unequivocal that they do not lead to further economic benefit. They just lead to people who would have spent money in one place spending money in another place. There might be small things, for example, if you're a city that can't attract Madonna to play a concert here, then maybe people who would have gone to Edmonton stay here, but those are very marginal compared to the cost of actually building the stadium. That doesn't say we shouldn't build it. City government does lots of things all the time for public benefit that is not necessarily a straight up dollars and cents benefit. So I'm very open to having this conversation, but City Council unanimously passed a series of principles recently of how we're going to move forward. You can find those at calgary.ca. But the number one principle is that public money must be for public benefit, not for private profit. And so that's really what we're working on now. The Calgary Next proposal, in particular, is looking at these lands in what we call the West Village. This is the land near the Greyhound Station and St. Alta C train station. It is very, very environmentally contaminated land. And so our
cost to the city, sir, to clean that up?
We think so.
Okay.
So our first gate, our first off-ramp, if you like, is to figure out exactly how much that environmental remediation is going to cost, and figure out if the money we could raise through increased property taxes in that area even balances with the cost of the remediation. That'll come back to council in the spring. So that's our first off-ramp. If it doesn't balance, then we have to look at a plan B, C, or D. If it does balance, then we have a whole series of other questions we have to ask ourselves about the nature and amount of public funding. You'll notice we're doing this very differently than most cities. In most places, I won't mention any names, but apparently there's a city a little bit to the north of us. These projects are presented to citizens like in a gift-wrapped box. This is what we're going to do, and it's not always transparent, it's not always clear what's being proposed, and we're taking, as we always do, a very different approach, which is we're inviting everyone into the conversation. We're revealing everything we know when we know it, and together we'll make a decision as a community on whether that site makes sense, on whether the joint field house and arena at football stadium makes sense, and on whether there should be public funding and what the nature of that public funding would be. Right now, the proposal before us sort of is $200 million from the owner, $240 million from a ticket tax. That would have to be money borrowed by somebody, the owner or the city. The city doesn't have the debt capacity, so probably not us. That would be paid back from a ticket tax. It's about half of the cost, and then the other half of the cost would come from taxpayers. And in addition to that, there would be a whole bunch of other downstream costs about improving the street network and so on. So the overall cost to taxpayers today is almost $700 million in this proposal.
And it's not going to happen overnight. It'll take some time.
We have lots of time.
Discussion.
We got a lot of time to sort this out.
And that's a good thing that we're talking about it.